Hola amigos, bien o no, y saludos desde Medellín. Hoy el tema es para mejorar nuestra fluidez. También es más importante para concentrar en las cosas que tú escuchas o cómo tú escuchas las palabras, mejor que cómo tú necesitas escribir las palabras. Ese es el tema de hoy. So, good evening again from Medellin. Happily quite nice and fresh at the moment. It's very hot today, but now we have a nice breeze. It's nice and cool, so that's an improvement. But another marvellous evening here. The theme of the day, when we're trying to improve our fluency, and remember that we're trying to improve our fluency principally in speaking, the more important thing to remember is listen carefully and take note, if you need to, on how you hear the sound. And don't worry about whether you can spell it correctly. So what I mean by that really is to, when you hear a new word in conversation that you want to remember or to use yourself, write it down as you hear it. Write it down in a way that is effectively phonetic for you, and don't worry whether that's a correct spelling or not. Because at the beginning, what you need to be able to do is to say the word correctly. You need to be able to pronounce it and reproduce that word in a way that the other people who you're talking to can understand clearly. And since you'll be speaking the word and not writing it, frankly, nobody cares how you think you spell it, as long as you say it correctly. So this is something to think of, particularly at the beginning. For me, I would say that the written form of the language is probably the last thing you need to focus on. At the beginning, it's more to do with lots of listening to get you sense of how the language sounds. Speaking, so you get to practice how the language sounds, and then reading to help you amplify your vocabulary and start to understand, or you can see then, how the language is put together. And then the final phase really is being able to spell it properly when you write it. Now this brings me to a second point with English, which is a bit different from Spanish. Spanish, marvellously and happily for me, since I'm learning Spanish, is a phonetic language in the sense that it's the way you write it is exactly how it sounds. English is not remotely like that. There are hundreds of exceptions, which for us as English children growing up takes us quite a long while learning all the exceptions. There are not many rules to help us. It's just that we have to remember that that particular word, even though it has letters that we think should say that particular sound, in this case it doesn't. These are what are known technically as sight words, and there are several hundred, and they do take a while to learn, which is why if you speak to English children of about 7 or 8 years old, often they will happily read things because now they can read quite well usually, but there are still many words that they will read and actually mispronounce. And it does take a while to get over that. So in that sense, when we're coming to this as adult learners, don't get too stressed out about, oh, I can't spell it properly. At the beginning, just write it down the way you think it should sound. Because if you can write it down in a way that makes sense to you, that when you read whatever way you choose to spell that word, you can reproduce the sound accurately, that's okay. If you then have a job where nowadays you have to use lots of email or things you're writing on the computer, there are plenty of very intelligent programs that will happily proofread and correct your grammar and bad spelling. So don't get too worried about that. For the moment, my suggestion is write it down as you hear it, the way you hear it, so that you can reproduce that sound when you want to speak that word. That's the idea for today. So, I hope you find that one useful. Déjame saber, como siempre, en los comentarios. But for now, from Medellin, on this marvellous evening, we'll say cheerio.